We're getting back to our series on Tomer Devorah. Tomer Devorah literally means the palm tree of Devorah. It's named after the what's mentioned in Tanakh, that there was a prophetess named Devorah, and she sat under a palm tree where she dispensed judgment and Torah teachings and guidance to the Jewish people. Example of a Jewish woman being in a position of leadership, Torah leadership over the Jewish people. And this book, Tomer Devorah, was written by somebody named Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, referred to by the acronym as Ramak. The Ramak lived in the golden era of Tzfat in the 1600s, the period of Yosef Karo and the Arizal, and the great renaissance of Jewish learning that took place there in Tzfat at the time, which was not only in the revealed aspects of the Torah, but in the esoteric teachings of the Torah as well. And the Ramak wrote many, many different writings having to do with the Kabbalah. One work which is more accessible to most people is this book, the Tomer Devorah. And on the one hand, it's certainly about Kabbalah, but one of the main purposes of Kabbalah in general, and of this book in particular, is to use the Kabbalistic teachings in order to improve a person's kind of daily living and regular service of Hashem. So the book, Tomer Devorah, is divided actually into two parts, the first part and the second part. The first part is using Kabbalistic explanations of the 13 attributes of mercy, the Yud Gimel Midos of Rachamim, in order to enable us to emulate God's attributes, understand them from a more deeper level, and therefore emulate them in a more profound way, and integrate them into our daily lives in order to make us better people. That's the first part of the book, which we've completed. The second part of the book, which we started and now we're going to want to continue, is doing a similar thing, but using but through the context of the 10 Sfiros. Okay, the 10 Sfiros is a Kabbalistic kind of principle or doctrine, description of creation. And in this part of the book, the Ramak is using an explanation of the teachings of the Sfiros in order to enable us to connect to their energy and therefore elevate ourselves and also improve ourselves spiritually. So if the first part of the book is using Kabbalistic teachings to work on, let's say, Midos, in this way it's kind of a Musar Sefer, the second part of the book is dealing also with that, but more about spiritual refinement as opposed to personality refinement. Yeah.
It seems like there's a date, Yud Tet Lachodesh. Does that mean there's like a study schedule?
Yeah. This particular version of the book was divided into parts in order to learn on a monthly basis. Yeah, we're certainly not going to be learning at that pace. That would just be reading it. But we're going to try and read it and explain it more thoroughly and discuss it. So Tomer Devorah was quite popular for in many centuries after it was written as a Musar book, but it fell out of use because of its being quite obtuse. And people who didn't really have access to the underlying Kabbalistic principles lost a major part of the point of the book. And therefore it kind of fell out of use because he only refers in very general terms and doesn't elaborate on those types of things very much at all. And what I'm here for, what I hope will be helpful, is to try and elaborate on those points and bring them into the context of the book in order to illustrate the author's point. So this is Tomer Devorah. Now we started the first part of the second part of the book, which is going through the Sfiros. And we therefore covered the section on Chokhmah, and we're up to Bina. And that's here on page Mem Ches, Perek Revi, the fourth chapter. But before actually starting the discussion here from Bina, where we left off, we should probably say some introductory words about the actual Sfiros themselves, and a little bit about of Chokhmah in particular, in order to prepare ourselves to continue. So the idea here in general is as follows, is that part of Kabbalah deals with what's called Maaseh Bereishis. Maaseh Bereshis means the coming into being of creation. And the Kabbalistic starting point is basically this, that when we say that God is one, that means that there is absolutely nothing other than God. And the intensity of that unity, of that oneness, is so great that really there should be and there cannot be anything other than God. The intensity of that oneness precludes the possibility of there being anything else. If God is one, then God is the entirety of everything, in which case there can be nothing other than God. So part of Kabbalah is trying to explain how existence can actually exist. How, as it were, could God create something other than itself? Itself meaning referring to God. And this area of Kabbalah is basically kind of elaborating on how that happened in terms of God's limiting the intensity of himself or of itself, to give with the resultant appearance that there are things which exist other than or outside of God, although in truth that can't be so. So that from a greater macroscopic point of view in the Kabbalistic version, there really is nothing other than God, and everything that exists is only God. And if it seems to be something separate from God, that's only a facade that resulted from these types of reductions or restrictions. Okay, and part of the system or the dynamic of reducing and restricting involves the idea of spheros. Okay, spheros then are kind of like spiritual refractors, where divine energy or light is refracted, diminished, and then used to create something which seems other than God. But since it's really just something that comes into being through a kind of a filtered presence of God, ultimately it's God itself, right? So what we're seeing really is a refraction of God, but that refraction is actually manifestation of God himself. So that it on one hand looks as if it's something other than God, when in fact it's really just an extension and therefore a part of and therefore God itself. And this whole concept of creation through restriction, through limitation, is referred to in the Kabbalistic terminology as tzimtzum. Okay, tzimtzum. Tzimtzum means retraction or limitation or restriction, any of these things and others. Okay, so they have their hand up.
Yes. Yeah. Are spheros it's like the upside down triangle thing, like each corner of the upside down triangle?
I think so. I think I know what you're referring to. Yeah. They could be right side triangles. They could be upside down triangles. But yeah, the spheros are often kind of portrayed diagrammatically as being 1, 1, 2, and triads. 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and then 1. Okay. Yeah. And I think that's what you're referring to. And I'll elaborate that in just a minute. I'll elaborate on that in just a minute. But this is basically the idea then. Before I elaborate, I'll just give you an analogy which I like to use, which is if you think about a nuclear power station. It emits huge amounts of energy, which provides the energy needs of millions of people. And every individual user is able, as a result of that tremendous source of power at the middle of the matrix, to put their little light bulb in their outlet and use that energy for some productive use. But that's only because the source of that energy, the intensity of the source of that energy, has been reduced incrementally until it becomes available for household use. But if people would plug their light bulbs into the actual source, the light bulbs would just be seared out of existence. And so therefore, in order for on the one hand to be able to tap into that energy productively without being burnt out of existence, as it were, by connecting to it, it needs to be reduced. And that's what we're talking about here. God is the central, absolute source of all power, light, and energy. That intensity of that power, light, and energy would simply sear any potential creation out of existence. It would implode back into the oneness of God. Therefore, God creates limitations stage by stage, step by step, introducing a limited degree of that light and energy and force into the incremental degrading of that system, where that energy kind of supports the existence of the system, right, without destroying it. And then it's enabled to be decreased one step further until creation, as we know it, physical creation, comes into being. Okay? And that's what the Hebrew word olam means. Olam means hidden. The revealed universe in Hebrew is called hiddenness. Because it's not referring to the revealed aspect of the world, it's referring to, very good, the hidden aspect of Hashem. Yeah? So that the world, the physical finite expression of God's existence, only comes into being through the hiding of God's energy within it. Okay? And that takes place gradually. The general framework is through 4 worlds: Atzilus, Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya. These are 4 spiritual worlds. And the spheros are part of one of those worlds. Okay? So we discussed in the past more about those worlds, and maybe we'll have a chance to do sometime in the future. I don't want to go into it right now too much. But let's focus for the time being now on these spheros. Through that pattern of restriction or reduction, you have these spheros. These spheros are not physical, they're not tangible in any way. They're like spiritual filters, and each one has a name. They're referred to as spheros not because they are spherical, although diagrammatically sometimes they're presented as being spherical. But the sources, what's that?
From Mispar.
It could be from Mispar, or Misaper, or Sapir, or Safar. I'll explain some of those meanings. By the way, doing this now is a bit apropos with the time period that we're in, it being Sfiras HaOmer, where we're counting the days of the Omer between between Pesach and Shavuos. How many weeks are there? 7. Yeah, 7. And the Kabbalistic teachings correlate those 7 weeks to the 7 lower spheros. So that preparing ourselves from Pesach to Shavuos is about actually using the teachings of the spheros to improve and to elevate ourselves in preparation for the receiving of the Torah. So hopefully the discussion that we'll have here will help us connect into that dimension of this time period that we're in Sfiros Omer. That's right, the Yortzeit of Lag BaOmer. So Sfiras HaOmer, the counting of the Omer, could also be understood as being the Spheros of Omer, the actual using of the teachings of the Spheros in order to reveal some of the hidden energy and dynamic in the time. But these Spheros, why are they called Spheros? From the word, one explanation is from the word sapir. Sapir is like is probably where the English word sapphire comes from, the precious gem. So the Sephiros are like a sapphire. It's like because they like I said, they're filters for divine light. So they emanate divine light like a beautiful gem. Another explanation as to why they might refer to the Sephiros is from the word the saper, right? Not necessarily to count, but to recount, to tell. And in a way, these Sephiros tell something about God, because they are reflecting and refracting divine energy into creation. We can actually use the spheros, or the energy that we perceive to be radiating from the spheros, to, what's the word I'm looking for, extrapolate back behind the spheros something about God. So in that way, the spheros are actually mesaper. They're actually telling us and revealing to us something about God. Another reason, another explanation as to why this, they're referred to as Sephiros is from the word sfar. Safar, which is also probably the root of the word we use in English for safari. A sfar in ancient Hebrew is a boundary, and these spheros do that. They're about kind of quantifying divine energy in sizable portions in order to be able to use that for creation. And so these are these are at least three reasons why they're called the spheros. Each sphere has a specific name, and there's a hierarchy within the spheros. There's a special relationship between each sphere and the other, and between groups of spheros and other groups of spheros. So the way it basically goes is that there is a highest, all-encompassing sphere, which is referred to as keser. Keser means crown. Okay? Keser is all-inclusive insofar as it has within it all of the other spheros which emanate from it. The first three spheros underneath Keser are referred to as Chokhmah, Bina, and Das. The three is the first triad of spheros. Chokhmah, Bina, and Das. Usually represented as Chokhmah to the right, Bina to the left, and Das lower between the two in the center.
That's what Chabad's acronym.
Exactly. So Chabad comes from this Kabbalistic term Chokhmah, Bina, and Das. So Chabad is actually an acronym that we used in Kabbalah before the inception of the Hasidut, which came to be known as Chabad. Chabad, although we know it more with the group of Chabad, is really a Kabbalistic concept, and it's an acronym referring to the relationship between this first triad of spheros: Chokhmah, wisdom; Bina, understanding; and Das. Generally speaking, as far as the spheres are concerned, spheres which are projected to the right are viewed as masculine, to the left as being feminine, and in the middle are viewed as being a synthesis of the two. Or alternatively, to the right, more having to do with the quality of chesed, to the left, having more to do with the quality of gvura, and in the center, balance, okay, equilibrium. And that pattern follows basically throughout. We're going to be seeing some of that as we go along. But in any case, Chokhmah, it would correspond to a faculty, something like raw intelligence, undifferentiated, undefined raw intelligence, the type of intelligence that we would associate with the divine and the highest level, where we can't really perceive the depth and the definition of God's intelligence. That would be Chokhmah. And the verse says that Hashem, Kulam ma rabu ma'asecha, Hashem, how great are your deeds, Hashem, Kulam bechokhmah asisa. All of them with Chokhmah, with the meat of Chokhmah you made, so that all of creation came into being through the first sphera of Chokhmah. Chokhmah being the divine intelligence. That Chokhmah transmits its energy to the left, its female counterpart in Bina. Bina is understanding, comprehension, and it's related to the Hebrew word boneh, which means to build, to create, to fashion, to build. And what Bina does is it builds upon the creative influence that was, let's say, ejaculated, to use the metaphor, into it from the male counterpart of Chokhmah. Okay, so that Chokhmah is really considered is actually called Abba, and Bina is called Ima. That's a Kabbalistic byword. Chokhmah is Abba, and Bina is Ima. Abba and Ima. The interrelationship, the interaction between Chokhmah and Bina, or Abba and Ima actually receiving the productive energy which is inserted into it or passed onto it from Chokhmah, gestates that energy, builds upon it, just like the female takes the productive energy from the male and gestates it and builds upon it until it gives birth to a synthesis of the two.
Would that be Das?
Very good. Okay, so that's Das. Very good. What you just did was Das. What you just did was Das.
Connect the two.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. That's exactly it. Yeah. So Chokhmah is the raw intelligence. Bina is the processing of that intelligence. Yes. And Das is the extrapolation. What you just did, the projection of the information. If there's a concept of one, and you can explain to a person the concept of adding, of addition, so then a person can come, therefore, to the conclusion of two. I understand the concept of one, and if there can be one, there can be another one. And if I understand the concept of the dynamic of addition, so I can come to new knowledge, given those principles. That would be Das. Okay, so that's Chokhmah, Bina, and Das. We've done so far Chokhmah. We're going to be starting off with Bina. But before we go into Bina, just to give a quick overview of the other spheres, and then we'll come back into Bina in more detail. Underneath Chochmah, Bina, and Das, you've got what's called the Midos, as opposed to those three which are more like faculties. Chochmah, wisdom, intelligence. Bina, understanding. Das, knowledge. Those are faculties. Those are like intellectual, cerebral faculties. Below these three faculties, you have the 7 lower of the 10 spheros, the 7 lower spheros. Those are associated with Midos. And they go Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchus. Right? Chesed, to the right, that's loving kindness. Gevurah, to the left, that's strength or control. Gevurah is very much a part of Tzimtzum, by the way. Gevurah, yeah?
And Tzimtzum was?
The restriction. Yeah? It requires a great degree of Gevurah.
Oh, is that like din is contraction?
What did you say? It's like?
Din is contraction.
Yes.
Chesed is expansion.
Exactly. Very good. So Gevurah has a lot to do. Gevurah and Din has a lot to do with Tzimtzum, with contraction. You've got Chesed and Gevurah, and then you've got Tiferes, which is the Midah in between. Without going into too much detail, Chesed corresponds to Avram, Gevurah corresponds to Yitzchak, that's self-control, and Tiferes corresponds to Yaakov. Okay. The 7 lower spheros, which are Midos, are also associated with persona. In this case, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Okay? There are impure spheros as well. And Avram had a certain degree of impurity, which was passed off to Ishmael, corresponding to the counterpart of Chesed in Tumah. And the same thing regarding Yitzchak. Yitzchak had a degree of self-control, but that degree of control had a negative component, which was passed off to Esav. And Esav represents, therefore, the sphere of Gevurah in Tumah, if you're following me. And Yaakov represents the pure balance, the purified balance of Chesed on the one hand and Gevurah on the other. So Yaakov, Titan Emes, the Yaakov, that would be the third.
There must be something negative when he passed on because the 11 brothers were really named Joseph.
That's true. And there's a whole concept of there being 10, not only of 10 spheros. I'm not sure if we're going to cover it in Bina or not, but 10 spheros, which are actually spiritual counterparts in impurity to the holy side as well. And these are called, this is part of the whole system which we refer to as chitzonim, external energy to the central system here that we're talking about, and that's the source for evil in the world, impurity and the like. Below Chesed, Gevurah, and Tiferes, you have Netzach, Hod, and Yesod, where Netzach means eternal, Hod means beauty, and Yesod means something like foundation or a base. And, they would correspond to Moshe, Netzach, Aharon, Hod, and Yosef, Yesod. Okay? And then below Yesod, you've got the singular sphera of Malchus. Malchus means kingship, and it corresponds to David HaMelech, of course, who was a king. And it's a lone sphera because after you have the refraction from Keser, which is a lone sphera on top, refracting through all of these other spheros of the spiritual spectrum, they're reunified and refused back into Malchus. Okay? And this is part of the Tzimtzum, so that the divine energy coming from Ein Sof in its source comes down through the different Oilamos, Atzilus, Bria, Yitzir, and Asiya. In the realm of the spheros, it comes through Keser. It's reduced and refracted down through these different spheros, and then reunited, refused into this lower form of Malchus, where Malchus then becomes the Keser for the next level down. Okay? So that Malchus actually fits in to Keser. And then the system starts over again. Keser down, refracted, until it's emptied into its own Malchus, where that Malchus is the lowest level of that plane, but it's the highest of the one below it. Okay? So that Malchus, which is feminine vis-a-vis receiving from above, becomes masculine vis-a-vis passing on that energy to the Sphira below. Okay? And in this way, Keser and Malchus are often, I don't think interchangeable is the right word, but if you actually were counting the number of spheros that we're talking about, there aren't 10, there are really 11. But we refer to the 10, to the spheros as 10. And that's because of this interconnectedness. Well, not because of the all-encompassing of Keser, but the interconnectedness of Malchus and Keser. They're both extreme and singular, whereas the others are part of the triads, right?
Whichever way up the diagram is, there's always going to be 1 and then 10.
Exactly. What, 1 and 9?
1 and then 9.
Right. 1 and 9.
Like a mirror.
Right. That's right. That's one way of understanding how Keser and Malchus are kind of, again, I don't quite find the right word, interchangeable, but that's how it works. When you're thinking about Keser, you're not thinking about Malchus. When you're thinking about Malchus, you're not thinking about Keser. So that ultimately there's really always 10. Yeah.
Did we get the picture of the King David star from that?
I don't know. I don't remember if I've ever seen the picture of the Star of David in the pattern of the spheros, but it could be.
It's a triangle on top of a triangle.
Yeah.
And one of them's upside down. So
Yeah.
You separate the two.
But you still need another 3, correct?
Yeah. I'm not. It's an interesting idea. There are really 7 spheros, but I'm not sure. One interesting idea, just parenthetically, I heard once about this is that David is spelled Dalid Vav, Dalid.
Yeah.
And a Dalid in a certain ancient Hebrew font appears something like a Greek delta, which is a triangle. So that David is really like delta and delta, 2 deltas, 2 triangles, two dalids, which were in some font, a kind of a triangular form. But in any case, this would then be, so what have we done so far? We have discussed generally what this book is, who the author was, what his intention in writing it is, what the parts of the book about, what part of the book that we're in, primarily the spheros. What the spheros are in general, how they fit into the Kabbalistic kind of description of creation in general, and then in a little more detail about what the individual spheros are and what their purpose is. Now we're going to go to even in more depth as we go through the spheros one by one, where the intention is going to be to use the teachings of the spheros to gain some type of spiritual elevation in each case. Okay? We've done Keser in some detail before we started last term. I don't want to go into Keser too much now. We want to focus on Bina. But just some of the major points that he made regarding Chokhmah is that since everything starts from Chokhmah, then Chokhmah, in a way, looks up to God to receive its energy, but doesn't maintain any of that energy for itself, but rather gives all of that energy down to the spheros below it. So that that's certainly true regarding the sphere of Keser.
Which do we say in the Amida? We say like all wisdom comes from you, but in Hebrew, how does it go?
Which part of the Amida you're talking about?
When we talk about wisdom.
Well, we ask Hashem for Chokhmah, Bina, and Das, according to some nusach of the Tefillah.
Are all 3 of those in there?
It depends on the nusach. In ours, the Hasidic and the Sephardi, it is. I don't know. I don't think it is in the Litvish.
Because I know
They say Haskel.
all wisdom comes from Hashem.
Yeah.
Like that's the idea.
Yeah, that's true. That and that's what we're talking about here as well. That Marabu Maasech Hashem Kulam, the Chokhmah Sisa, everything was made with Chokhmah. So that Chokhmah actually was used by God to make and create and contribute to everything. And therefore, a person who is connecting to the Sephira of Chokhmah will not take that power for himself in order to gain, for self-aggrandizement, but will actually use his productive, creative talents and abilities to benefit others. and to take care of the needs of others, and not to lord his power over others, but to share it equally and magnanimously with others. So these would be the types of teachings that we would learn from the quality of Chokhmah, in order to elevate ourselves and place ourselves in a better place, in the space of creation. This and some of the other ideas are things that were discussed in the previous chapter regarding Chokhmah.